I do think that, like you said, you look at the schedule, I think USC should be favored in 9 of these games. Missouri State, Georgia Southern, Purdue, Michigan State. Illinois is a little bit more in the middle, I think, just because of how, good they were, especially early season last year. But I do think USC is favored in that game. Nebraska, Northwestern, pretty clearly. After what USC did in Nebraska last year, Northwestern they moved the game to Friday night, so that tells you all you need to know. Iowa and then UCLA. And that leaves, like you said, the Oregon game, the Notre Dame. But I think that the problem isn't going to be those more competitive games, because I think USC showed their ability to be more competitive last year. I mean, they had a lot of bad breaks, a lot of bad moments in kind of the closing moments of games that, they lost like 4 or 5 games that they could have won within the last few minutes. I mean, the only game that they were really out of at any point was the Notre Dame game. And even in that game, I mean, I remember it being the fourth quarter and feeling like USC still had a legitimate shot to win the game. It would take, a supreme effort by Jaden Mayava and the rest of the group to have won that game. But it still felt like they had hung around enough that it was possible, at least. So I think I could see a scenario where USC goes into a game that they're not favored to win and they win the game. And USC fans are, they're thrilled. They feel like this is the year we're making the college football playoffs. Stuart Cravens was right. All that kind of stuff. And then they go into a game on the road that they're supposed to win, or even a game at home. The road provided the main problems for them last year, but even at home, maybe they welcome. I missed the Michigan game. That was one I missed. Michigan, Notre Dame, Oregon. You mentioned them all. That's my bad. Excuse me. But maybe they go to an Illinois. Maybe they go to Nebraska. Maybe even Iowa at home. One of these games that they're supposed to win, and they just aren't prepared for the Big Ten environment. They for whatever reason just underestimate their opponent. They underestimate Big Ten football. They're not, they're kind of riding the high of the game that they just won a little bit too much. Then I could see them dropping one of those games. And I honestly think that is going to be a bigger problem. Is I'm decently confident that USC can hang around in some of these against some of these powerhouse teams. And, I think that it's not a horrible bet to say that they could even win one of the 3 games that they're supposed to lose, quote unquote. But I think the problem is going to be if they drop 1 or 2 of these games that they're supposed to win, because last year there were several games that they were supposed to win that just were too close for the entirety of the game. They should have ran away with it in the first half. They let the team hang around, and then they kind of bad clock management or bad play calling in the fourth quarter coughed it up. And, that happened against Minnesota, that happened against Maryland, that happened against Washington. Looking at a lot different of season if those games are kind of tightened up. And I don't know. I think I need to see them consistently win the games they're supposed to win, because it feels like even in the Lincoln Riley era in the last couple of years, they haven't won those games. And that's honestly been the bigger problem and the bigger thing that the USC fan base has been kind of irritated with over them staying competitive in the games that they're not supposed to win, because last year they kind of did that. So I think part of being a powerhouse program is taking care of business in the games that you're supposed to win. So that's going to be the bigger storyline, in my opinion.
Comment from our friend Jeff Rodriguez: they need to beat Illinois to get the season rolling. Jeff, as usual, you're right on the money. I haven't spent a lot of time and a lot of energy thinking about this schedule, because my instant reaction as soon as the schedule came out was, you got to be 9-3. You got to win the 9 you're supposed to, and you take your swings against Michigan, Oregon, and Notre Dame. But if you go 0-3, like, everyone can accept, all right, the program's not quite there yet, but just win the 9 you're supposed to. And I think of those 9, Illinois is definitely number 1 on the list, because Missouri State, Georgia Southern, Purdue, that should be an obvious 3-0. And then Michigan State at home in September, like, you really should take care of that. Like, maybe that's a game for a half, but like, USC should definitely be better over 60 minutes. But then Illinois, road trip, and we remember getting tripped up at Michigan and also Minnesota at pretty much the same part of the schedule last season. And then, of course, you have an off week. You get 2 weeks to prepare for Michigan at home. So if you have a win over Illinois, you're 5-0, and that Michigan game gets maximized. And this is a parallel with last season, right? The Minnesota game was so important because if USC had won the Minnesota game, it would have gone into the Penn State game with only one loss, everything to play for. It really punctured the balloon to not go into that Penn State game with only one loss. So it's very similar here. You go into that Michigan game, and essentially the double stack, Michigan and Notre Dame. You need to be 5-0 going into those two games. And so the Illinois game is the obvious landmine / obstacle, whatever you want to call it. And, Illinois had a really good year last year, but, Illinois did get to play the soft, gooey, mushy middle of the Big Ten. And of course, Illinois crushed Michigan at home, and Michigan was not very good. So there were some teams in the upper end of the Big Ten, or teams that were supposed to be in the upper end of the Big Ten, I should say, that came down. So I think it was less about Illinois rising. It was more about the rest of the field coming down to Illinois' level. Now, credit Illinois for doing what it did. And, of course, it beat South Carolina in the SEC in its bowl game. That turned a lot of heads. So Illinois had a magnificent season. But nevertheless, there is legitimate skepticism that Brett Bielema can keep Illinois at that standard. And USC, with the talent it does have, it should feel that it can go into Champaign and beat Illinois, because Illinois needs to prove that it can stay in the top tier of the Big Ten, especially with other teams in the Big Ten rising, that it's going to be hard for Illinois to maintain its place. So really, if you go and get that Illinois win and you're 5-0 going into the Michigan Notre Dame double stack, then this season has a chance to be good. And whether or not the season fulfills its potential, you at least want that Michigan game at the Coliseum. It's going to be such a huge event. You want that Michigan game to mean everything. Now, whether you actually win the game or lose the game, that's one matter. But you want to have the maximum buzz, right? You want those incoming recruits to have a game day at the Coliseum, which is so electric that it kind of seals for them, I want to be at USC, right? So for the Illinois game, important for 2025, also important for 2026, one could argue. So that's another point to make about the Illinois game. Thank you, Jeff Rodriguez, for making that point. So Ethan, other than the Illinois game, and we're keeping this within the 9, not talking about a baseball team. We're just talking about the games that USC is generally expected to win, the games that this program really needs to win in 2025. We've talked through Illinois. The other game of the 9 that you're really, really focusing on and drilling deep on?
I think for me, which there's a great point in here by Russ Campbell, we could end up laying an egg against Illinois, but beating Michigan at home. I think that's a very good point. I think in that situation, if Russ Campbell's hypothetical scenario happens and USC does lose to Illinois but beats Michigan, you kind of resurrect the season a little bit, because you have one loss on your record, but one loss can play in the college football playoff. So then, you're still going into Notre Dame with playoff implications, if that makes sense. You're still going in there with that kind of juice, especially coming off a big win like Michigan. It's like, we beat a great team. We're still in this. We can still, it kind of comes down now to how we perform in this Notre Dame game. And just kind of seeing how that all plays out. I think for me, a big momentum issue is going to actually be that Nebraska game, because I think the Notre Dame game, I think, I go in every year with as much confidence as I can and, excitement and optimism as I can possibly muster. I want to see my Trojans beat Notre Dame. And, I still hold on to the incredible vibes of that game in, during the 2022 season. It was remarkable. Loved watching it, loved every minute of it. But, I think out of all the games on the schedule, that one's the kind of most like, okay, that's a team that's coming off the national championship game. That's a team that has all the advantages in the world right now of the current NIL setup and the current, just how the college football world is with them as an independent and kind of the incentives that they get as an independent team making the college football playoff, all that stuff. And just what Marcus Freeman is doing, again, it's understandable. In a couple of years, we want to be caught up to Notre Dame, so it becomes less understandable, but again, understandable. So I think whether you're sitting at 1 loss, 2 losses, what I could see happening, to be honest with you, is, even taking Russ Campbell's comment to more of an extreme, I could see them beating Illinois, beating Michigan, going in and losing to Notre Dame, and then that Nebraska game becomes really important, because if you lose to Notre Dame, you have only 1 loss, and then Nebraska, Northwestern, Iowa should be wins. You go into Oregon with 1 loss, and then you have essentially an inside track to a college football playoff spot. You can afford to lose to Oregon in Eugene, which is always a tough game. And, everybody's kind of celebrating the season as a success, regardless of what happens at Oregon, whatever. But Nebraska is a difficult place to play. It's all places in the Big Ten are difficult places to play, but there's nothing to do in Lincoln, Nebraska. So they pack that stadium full every single week, and it's always full of Nebraska fans. They're some of the most passionate fans in college football. I remember meeting a lot of them when they came out for the Nebraska USC game, which, they're some of the most passionate fans and some of the, most false optimistic fans. They were all there. They all believed that they were going to win. It was great to see USC pull that one out, especially in Jaden Mayava's debut. But I just think they're going to throw a lot of support behind their team. They're going to throw a lot of hostility against whatever team is playing them, regardless of what kind of season that Nebraska's having. I think that Matt Rule's a good coach. I think that program is, kind of reemerging. They're doing a lot better on the recruiting trail. I haven't paid a super close eye on them, but I've been paying a little bit of attention because I have some uncles who are Nebraska fans because they were born in Nebraska. So I kind of pay a little bit of attention to them here and there. So I just feel like they're a program on the rise. Dylan Raiola is obviously really good. So I just think that, and just in general, I think USC's had a momentum problem the last several years. I think back to 2023, especially, where rolling into that Notre Dame game, they were undefeated. And, there'd been a couple of scares. There was that scare in that Arizona game that went to way too many overtimes. And, Arizona ended up being a good football team, but at the time people didn't feel like they were. So at the time it felt like it was a game that we should have run away with. But, kind of rolling into that Notre Dame game, USC was undefeated. And then after that, they won one more game besides the bowl game. Like, they lost that game and it felt like the wheels fell off. Like, they lost, just kind of snowballed. They lost everything else. So if they lose one of these games, whether that's Michigan, whether that's Illinois, whether that's Notre Dame in the middle of the season, they just can't let it snowball to where they're losing these games that they should win at the end of the season. I think out of all of the kind of 9 that are left after that Notre Dame game, Nebraska catches my eye as the most dangerous. Iowa always plays teams tough, but I feel like they're predictable enough that you can kind of prepare. We don't really know how good Dylan Raiola is going to be this season, which is another kind of X factor for Nebraska being potentially good. So I just think that game is the biggest in the 9, other than Illinois, that I could see being a real stumbling block and really derailing the season if they let the kind of momentum problem become an issue.